Hey everybody and welcome to another video. Now today's video is going to be rather long and in-depth, so I'm going to take this raw file of the Basel-Rhine bridge and I'm going to turn it into a picture like this at the end. And because I'm going to spend really a lot of time and going to edit it as if I would edit it without making a tutorial, it's going to be very long, but also I'm going to explain everything in much more detail, and you know, it might be just more interesting for those of you who already kind of know the basics of Lightroom. Alright, so let's get started here. Now this is actually a photo that I've taken for a part of another video that should be out sometime next week or so. But as you can see, it is a little bit too bright. So the great thing by having a raw file is that I can just tone it down a bit, and I like to kind of try out different brightness levels because you could definitely go for a high key look here, but you could also make it quite dark. And what I actually am thinking of doing is bringing up the whites a little bit, then bringing down the highlights, so you know, these very bright parts right here aren't quite as blown. But of course, by bringing up the whites, you add some dynamic, but I really cannot push it too far for the overall global whites here. So let's go around 35 and bring the exposure to a little bit, yeah, maybe just like minus one third of a stop. Yeah, that looks pretty good actually. Now, as a whole starting point, I'm not sure if I want to add contrast or minus blacks, because especially in night pictures, you already have kind of dark parts no matter what, and I don't like to have stuff super contrasty in night pictures. It really, yeah, it doesn't work that well. So what I'm gonna do instead is really raise the shadows, yeah, by 100. And even raise the blacks a little bit more. Now as of this right now, it really looks a little bit dull, so I do want to work with the contrast, yeah, and bring that to around 35, something like that. Now clarity, I do think, yeah, I'm definitely going to go into the local clarity in a bit and add a lot more plus clarity on the foreground and a lot less on the background. But for the overall picture just here, I do want to go into the minus at least a bit. And yeah, let's see if I want to change the vibrance. I mean, it's definitely too blue, so I'm going to have to adjust the split toning down here or the color temperature. Let's just try out the color temperature real quick. You know, it's gonna be impossible to get everything how I want it to look like here in the color temperature alone. So I'm gonna keep it. You know what? Let's actually bring it further into the blues. And the tints, yeah, maybe just a hint more purple, magenta tone. Then go into the split toning, of course go into the highlights, and see what I want to do here. Probably add some quite severe warm tones, and mix that with a tiny bit of magenta as well. But it doesn't hurt to also go into the other colors, because maybe you'll find something, you know, that you haven't thought about, but that actually happens to work really well. So again, I'm gonna go, yeah, I think I'm definitely gonna end up with the warm tones, and then put the saturation at quite a high level of around 60. And with it, I'm of course also going to go into the shadows and see what I can do there. Shadows will never pretty much do as much as the highlights, but it can still be quite useful to at least try them out and again get differentiation that way. And here I think I'm actually going to go in kind of a dark blue to purple tone, and just add about, yeah, 10-15 saturation here. Now just to show you before the split toning after, it gets a little bit closer as to how I want to make it look, but at the end it is a bit too much purple, so I'm going to reset the tint here in the basics and again play around with the highlight slider. I really want to have the overall picture rather cool actually, and just have the, you know, the lights themselves a little bit warmer. So I'm going to bring down the color temperature even further and go into the split toning again and bring down the saturation a bit. So, you know, these are all of the things that are actually, you know, what I would do in a regular picture, but that I usually cut out in my regular tutorials because it can be a little bit repetitive or maybe even boring. But again, I think if you already know Lightroom pretty well, this is kind of the most exciting, most interesting stuff. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to bring down the saturation, I think, and bring up the vibrance in exchange. So from before any editing to this, it's not such a huge difference, so I always like to kind of compare from time to time. And you know what, there's just too much purple still, so I'm gonna go back into the split toning and bring that these warm tones more towards the right and less into the purples. And that definitely looks much closer to how I want it to look like. Now going to the tonal curve, because I brought up the shadows and the blacks and everything, it is very dull, very low contrast. So I'm gonna try to fix that a bit in the tonal curve. So let's just see what each of these sliders, you know, what each of these sliders does to the picture. And, okay, so I don't really need that much super bright highlights, because as you can see, they're already very bright. So I'm actually going to bring them down a bit, and I think in exchange maybe go a little bit into the plus light. So yeah, that definitely looks a lot better. Now darks is where it's becoming a little bit more interesting, because I don't know if I want to bring it to the minus. Let's see the shadows first. And the shadows are of course always great if you want to have an overall rather low contrast picture, but you still want some of these parts be very, at least contrasty. It will just bring down the very dark shadows, as you can see here. Even with minus 100, the entire picture still looks rather low contrasty, but you just have some spots. And yeah, I think I'm gonna bring down the darks by a bit and the shadows by a bit more. And just move on, because yeah, I'm gonna have to fine-tune that in the local adjustments anyways. So speaking of local adjustments, let's go back into the basics real quick and see with the exposure. Okay, so I think I should have shot this a lot darker in camera. But you know, you can definitely fix it and still get a great picture. But going to the hue, now I want to try out the different hues for the blues, because as I said previously, I really don't want to go too far into the magenta or purples. So instead I'm going to see what else I can do, what else I can fine tune, and then also go into the saturation. The great thing about the HSL tool is that you can just go into this little pinpointer, drag it over the color you want to change, and you know, drag up and down your mouse and it will do it automatically for you. Yeah, a bit into the minus luminant. You know, I do want to capture this overall rather night and evening-ish mood, so I don't want to have everything very bright and shiny, except for the lights, of course. And that's another thing that I do quite a lot, is just zoom into the picture and see where all of these adjustments, how they actually look in detail while zoomed in small parts. So here it actually, yeah, I think it looks pretty good. But I will have to definitely, yeah, okay, I'm gonna crop the picture. I'm also gonna do a ton of local adjustments, but before I do all of that, let's just zoom in, add some sharpening. Now this is actually taken with the new A6300 from Sony. I just recently upgraded to that from my Canon 600D. And it's definitely much sharper, despite the kit lens from the Sony as well. But yeah, a little bit of sharpening can always help. And then the masking, of course, while holding down the Alt key, just making sure everything that I actually want to be sharpened is sharpened and nothing else. And noise reduction, I mean, I shot this at, yeah, ISO 400. There's not much noise, and I don't want to introduce any of the plasticky and low detail look. I really don't like the noise reduction look at all, and here it's luckily not necessary to add either. Instead though, I'm definitely going to add a little bit of color noise reduction. This only has a positive impact. It removes the purple and green sensor noise, and yeah, I think that's all I'm gonna do here. As you can see, from before the detail tool adjustments to after, just a little bit more sharp, a little bit more crisp and clear. Now, lens corrections, let's just remove the camera aberration real quick. And that is, of course, you know, the purple and green fringing, so not the sensor noise, but just the fringing on these high contrast edges that you might otherwise get. And going down, transform, I don't really want to transform anything, and effects. Maybe I'll actually add some vignetting, but let's actually wait for a second because I'm going to crop the picture first. And I really just want to real quick go into this camera calibration here and see what all of these presets do. This will try to imitate a JPEG look in your camera, but of course while still keeping the raw file and everything. Camera neutral actually looks really good. This one is a little bit too saturated. Not too bad either, but yeah, these are kind of too heavy duty. So camera neutral, I like this one a lot. Let's just go through all of them real quick again. I mean, camera deep doesn't look bad either. Maybe it even looks better. You know what? I think I'm just gonna get rid of camera neutral and decide between camera deep and camera vivid. So this will depend on your actual camera that you're shooting with. Also, you will only have the option if you're shooting with a RAW file. But I'm definitely gonna stick with camera deep here. Compared to just the dope standard, it looks a lot better for this picture. It really brings in some of the mood and some of the darkness that I want in just the right areas. Alright, so with it though, it does add a bit too much saturation. So I'm gonna go into the blue primary, just bring down the blues a bit. And again, fine tune all of that. And the sliders can really have a very slight variation to your overall colors, as they are the primary color sliders. They will also affect all of the other colors, so if you move around the reds, you will also affect the greens and the blues because they're made out of the reds to a certain amount. So you really have to be careful with it, but at the same time it does have quite a lot of potential. And yeah, the greens aren't as useful here, but I think the blues look pretty good as they are, just a bit less saturation. And yeah, with that, let's go back into the cropping before I do the final global adjustment, which is the post-crop vignetting. And okay, so as you can see, there's just so much sky up here that I don't need. I don't have any use for that. Also on the bottom, it's a little bit too much, although not super crazy much that I want to cut off. And you could go into the preset here, and a classical panorama preset would be 3:1. However, I'm not sure, maybe that's already a bit, yeah, that's definitely a bit too tight from the top and bottom. So I'm just gonna unlock that real quick and go for a custom crop of, yeah, something like that maybe. And make sure that the bridge is kind of in a nice place. Doesn't have to line up with the rule of thirds line down here, but I also don't want to have it in the middle. And speaking of that, cropping and everything, I think it isn't quite straight, so this looks a little bit better. In situations like these, you can just kind of look at the houses if you don't shoot super wide, or look at the bridge and kind of orient yourself at that, even though, you know, the bridge itself is at a little bit of an angle. That's why I don't use the bridge itself as a sole guidance. But I think, again, we'll just compare from before any editing to after. This is, of course, with the crop applied. And you can see, I mean, the left is very bright and stuff, but the right is really getting close to the actual look that I want for this picture. Especially the overall, you know, the darker parts look really nice. However, I do have to make the bright parts a bit brighter and really make them punch. So before I do all of that though, again, I'm gonna go here into the vignetting and actually add some, bring the midpoint quite far towards the center and bring the feather to the right. Now the amount shouldn't be too much. This is really pushing it very, very far. So instead, I think 10 or 11 works just fine. And vignetting is a great thing to, of course, add additional, interest towards the center as you make the corners darker. And if I would be smart enough to find it again, you could also see the before and the after. Especially helps in dark pictures as well. Kind of night picture. So now I'm gonna quickly go back to the basics adjustments and just kind of see what I want to do with the vibrance and saturation, because okay, so let's see it here. Maybe I actually want to bring down the vibrance and bring up the saturation, or maybe not. You know what, let's actually bring down the saturation a little bit and then bring down further the actual vibrance, then go into the HSL tool and just grab this little hue slider for the blue tones and make them slightly more light bluish. Now overall, I do think that looks really good, but now I'm gonna go into the local adjustments, and the first thing I wanna do here is add a graduated filter over the sky, because I do want to make the sky just a lot darker than the foreground, and I really don't mind if some of these buildings are in there as well, although of course you could go into the brush and just add a minus brush by holding down the Alt key. I really don't want to do that here, especially that's such a terrible job as I did, but I mean, you can kind of see and understand how much you could fine tune all of that. But here, again, I just want to kind of go into the minus exposure with the actual filter and also add a bit more texture. As you can see, there is a lot of texture from this shot in the clouds, but I still want to bring it out a bit more. And I think I'm going to bring up the whites, add some contrast, bring down the blacks and bring up the shadows so I can actually bring down the blacks further without making it super too dark. And just trying out some of the color temperature here. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna make it, this is actually a good time to think about color, the entire color of the picture, because overall I like the color, but I wanted to make it kind of fade from the light blue into the medium blue into almost warm tones. Maybe I'm also gonna do that from the back to the front. Yeah, actually, I just had a great idea, because I wanted to make this foreground very blue and the background very warm, but I'm gonna do the opposite. So I'm gonna make sure that the background is very bluish, and of course you can also go into the color right here and fine tune the hue further. But with doing that, I'm gonna show you in a second, after I find the exact hue that I want. Yes, just something like that. I'm actually going to go into a quite light blue. That's going to be very important here. But, yeah, okay. Yeah, let's just keep it there. So, the idea here is that the background will also be kind of more hazy. So I'm going to go into the minus clarity. And I think that looks really good. So just quickly to compare from before that graduated filter to the after. I mean, even as it is, it looks more interesting, but I want to, of course, add a lot more complexity to the color of the picture. So now what I'm going to do is add another graduated filter for the bottom. And speaking of the bottom, I think I'm going to crop it a little bit more, just like that. And add another graduated filter for the entire bottom actually. So as you can see, this filter just affects this area right here, whereas this filter will affect the area down here, and kind of a smooth feather, so all of these adjustments actually blend into the rest, and I'm going to make it a lot warmer overall, and also go into the color and add even more warm tones here. So the idea here is that I really want the foreground to be very warm, and I'm just gonna fine tune the actual filter position again, so the foreground be very warm. And for that I'm even gonna add another filter right here, reset everything except for the color temperature and the color itself. This is really a thing that you could not push as far with a JPEG file. You would start to lose all sorts of detail and just make a mess out of your picture. but thanks to RAW, especially such a high quality RAW file from an A6300, you can do all of that without losing much quality, you know, at all, and not really breaking your picture. So that looks pretty good actually. Yeah, let's just fine-tune the tint and make it very, very soft on the edge. And then what I'm gonna do for the middle, because I cannot really reach this part right here with any of the graduated filters, I'm just gonna add a very big radial filter like this, just add a ton of exposure real quick to actually see how it looks like. And then yeah, something like that, even a bit softer. Definitely gonna bring the feather to 100 here. And then I'm gonna go into the colors again and kind of try to make it seem a bit more blue, but not as bluish as the sky. So all of this is really kind of, you know, it's the stuff that takes a lot of time, but that really will do a lot to your picture. So this actually looks pretty good. Maybe a bit more into the greens. And yeah, let's just keep it there. Now I'm gonna do another graduated filter over the top of the sky. And because of that, I'm gonna go a little bit into minus saturation and even go further into the light blue. So there's also a difference within the blue tones of the sky itself. And this looks just absolutely beautiful. And yeah, again, minus saturation because I don't want to have it as much as the foreground. Alright, so like just to show you all of the stuff that I did with the colors. To the left, of course, it's brighter and stuff, but here you can really see how it goes from rather warm and purplish to medium to very blue, and then going to the very, very light blue, almost a little bit into the green tones, but not too much. So what I think I'll have to further fine-tune though is just add a little bit more exposure by adding whites in the foreground here, and overall that looks really, really good. Okay, so in terms of the color, I think we're getting there. I'm gonna add another radial filter and just add some more warm tones over this part right here. And again, this is very tedious, very time consuming, but this is really how I would edit a picture without recording a tutorial or anything. So, you know, it's always interesting to try out new stuff and new formats. And ultimately, you might just enjoy it even more than these kind of quick videos. So, plus whites like crazy here. Just doing that, you know, kind of adding some punch over the back along with the fine-tuning of the actual colors. And yeah, okay, so I'm just gonna turn that to auto down here so it automatically goes away once I go over the right adjustments. And I'm gonna turn it off again on. Yeah, that looks so much better. You know what, I could actually even add another very, very big radial filter, and I absolutely love the radial filters. Always want to make sure that you have your feather at 100 though, and just kind of make it like this, so not exactly over the middle, but so the actual left side is a little bit less strong than the right here. And in this case, I'm gonna add a bit of a darker blue in the color here, and just make it look something like that. Yep, that's getting there, and of course nowhere near as much saturation, and bring maybe even the overall saturation a bit to the left. So I could definitely add even more color differentiation within the sky, but I think I have to stop at some point. Although, you know what, since I mainly focused on the actual blue tones in the top right here, you know, the differentiation of the blue tones, let's actually, before or after I fine-tune this filter right here, by holding down the Alt key, you can just make one side larger or smaller. So yeah, now I'm quickly gonna grab another radial adjustment, graduated filter, that's what I meant to say, and just gonna add some warm tones over the left, going to the minus with the overall saturation, and add some more warm tones in the color here. Yeah, something like that, and you know, it should really just be a hint, nothing too crazy. So yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So maybe even a more contrast. And of course, as always, fine-tuning all of that stuff, having a very, very soft feather, as you can see here, so you can really have a bunch of different adjustments and they will blend into one another, and that way you will make it look a lot more natural as well. Now, speaking of blue tones, I'm real quick gonna add a very last graduated filter for the colors, which is on the bottom right, and here I also want to make them a little bit more bluish, less warm. So that is also so we have some differentiation within the foreground itself. And of course I cannot go too far here. I also have to kind of make it more dark bluish and add a little bit of saturation for this part right here. Angle it like this, and then grab another one, angle it like this, and make it really super small in the bottom right. Add even more blue tones and go into the color again to add some dark blue tones. Alright, so I think this is really a lot of color adjustments, but I absolutely love the look right now. As you can see, like here it's kind of more purplish bluish, then going to the warm tones of the bridge, going to the medium warm tones, Lightroom should load, there we go, going to the warm tones, going to the kind of bluish tones, then we have different blue tones right here, all the way to the top right, which is very light bluish, almost a tiny bit greenish, and then as we go to the left it becomes a bit warmer. Just so many different colors, so many different hues in here without making it look bad at all, if you ask me. So what I want to do is now just work with the haze with the graduated filter. Yeah, so I'm gonna add one very big one again, very soft edge and stuff, and just kind of go into the into the plus clarity, along with a little bit of plus contrast, and I think I also have to bring up the plus, the shadows into the plus. And then I'm gonna grab another one in pretty much parallel, also a very, very soft edge, and go a little bit into the minus clarity, minus contrast, and just kind of make it seem as if it would be faded and not as crisp as the foreground. Now I might even add multiple layers of that, so for the top right in the sky, even less clarity, and the same thing here for the, the bridge, right, like this, and kind of angle it. Then you can really add even more clarity, even more sharpness, even can go into the sharpness filter, of course, and add quite a lot there. You have to, of course, always be sure not to overdo it, because even if you want to have, a very heavy adjustment, you always want to keep it looking somewhat natural at least. So that looks pretty good. Again, I'm going to fine tune the clarity and maybe replace it with some sharpness, and this looks really good. Now, you might not be able to see it if you're watching this on a phone, but in a print or something like that, you will really be able to see the difference from the foreground being very crisp, very sharp, going into the more hazy and less sharp and dreamy background. Absolutely love that look, and it just works so well. Additionally to that, we have some differentiation from the right of the picture, which is not super crisp and sharp in comparison to the left, which is also a little bit more contrasty. So I think you kind of get the idea of this whole thing. It's all about adding differentiation, interest, and contrast, and all of that stuff, while still keeping it overall relatively natural. So now, let me think actually for a second if I want to add something else with these filters. Okay, yeah. Okay, I was thinking about just making the background a lot darker than the foreground, and I'm not sure if I want to do that. Let's just quickly... Yeah, of course, it's just a quick idea giver, not any of the fine adjustments. I don't know about that. I just pressed the wrong key, but I don't know about doing that because it does make the sky quite a bit, maybe just a little bit more. Yeah, something like that. Minus half a stop instead minus a third of a stop, and then and then in exchange grab a radial filter real quick, plus exposure, all the feather all the way to the right, and kind of making a circle over the center of the picture right here, and you know, even making it quite long actually, so one side can be dragged out of the picture, and make this just a little bit brighter, so there's also some kind of center point, you know, that really draws you into the picture, and I think this position is quite good. So now it's really going to be the last step, which is dodge and burning. Now dodge and burning is making individual parts darker or brighter, and you can do it with the adjustment brush. Personally, I prefer to use the radial filter for that, and feather to 100, masking inverted. And then I think I'm first of all going to start off with plus exposure. So I'm going to mix a little bit of plus exposure with quite some plus whites, plus shadows, minus clarity, and a hint of warmth in the color. So let's just add a filter right here to see how it looks. Yeah, it needs some more whites, needs some more contrast, and also needs some more color. So here, now what I'm gonna do is just kind of create some very small ones over this bridge. Right click duplicate, bring it over here as well. And the idea that I have for this picture is to have, you know, overall kind of a dark mood and stuff, but have the actual bright parts be very bright. So I'm just gonna right click duplicate, drag it over the entire bridge here, then right click duplicate and make a quite big one over here. But instead of increasing the contrast even further, I'm actually gonna bring it to the left and bring up the shadows with it. So that looks a lot better as well. Now the thing with these radial filters and dodge and burning is you can also stack them on top of each other. So I'm just gonna shift that one slightly to the right and, you know, make these houses a little bit brighter as well. Let's see if I want to do something in this industrial district in the back. Now definitely not as much warm tones, but maybe just, yeah, just a little bit more white to really make him punch and stuff. And I think I want to mix that with minus clarity as well. Then right click duplicate, bring a rather small one over these trees right here, because these trees should be a lot more saturated and definitely a little bit warmer, a little bit more like this. And that's a great thing with these radial filters as well. If you find like some area that you don't like, you can just use it to correct some of the color or whatever, even if it doesn't just necessarily mean dodge and burning. So yeah, you can really use these radial filters for a lot. And over here, I'm also going to do a little bit of that. Of course, not add any green tones here though. And just kind of, yeah, make the top of these houses a little bit brighter as well. And, you know, I think this is really getting close to how I want to make it look like at the end. But there is just a little bit more fine tuning to be done. So let's just bring that over here and then duplicate that filter for the trees and also bring it over the other trees. Now this adds a little bit more green, a little bit more saturation. And yeah, now what I want to do is just finalize it with some minus exposure. So dodge and burning, you know, is of course plus and minus exposure. And even though the plus exposure is the more exciting, the more important one, the minus exposure can also help greatly with your picture. So now, as you can see, I added a very, very slim filter right here, so this very dark one. And the reason for that is because, alright, I don't really know if I can explain it in a good way, but if you look at this right here, you know, it looks great and interesting and the colors are nice, but it is a little bit flat. So a way to add contrast without actually adding contrast over the entire picture is just to add a very, very narrow radial filter with some minus exposure and perhaps even minus blacks. Minus blacks is perhaps a little bit too much, but minus exposure, look at that. It is a lot more defined that way, and you kind of can create differentiation within certain parts. You can also, of course, make, shadows on the bottom of bridges a little bit more prominent. So I'm going to use that right here. And again, just right click and duplicate and kind of bring it over some of these parts that are overall, could just use a bit more minus exposure to add additional interest and complexity. Now, the thing with these radial filters for dodge and burning is really, you want to go according to the lighting scheme that is already there. So you don't want to just go over an area and, make a super bright area super dark. You just want to go over an area that is already kind of dark or should be dark. That way you still keep the naturalness and still, add a lot of differentiation and interest. It's really all about manipulating your photo and changing around settings in a way that ultimately still looks good and not overdone. So of course you can debate whether this is a good picture or whether you think this editing style is any good. But personally, I prefer to have very heavily edited photos, so that is definitely reflected in this picture. But even if you don't like that particular style, you can still kind of look at some of the things I show you and, just pick all of the things that you actually think do make sense out of it and use it in your own editing. Of course, every style is a little bit different. So let's bring some more over the right. And as you can see, these are very small filters. And you might not think they're doing very much, but once I show you the before and after, I think you will be very surprised at what these minus exposure filters actually do. So here, going a little bit over there as well, and just adding kind of a dark area to this tree. And with that, I really think that's pretty much it. You know what, I'm just gonna add another filter real quick with some plus shadows over the entire bridge. It was just a tiny bit too contrasty and too dark for my taste. And while I'm at it, maybe also add a little bit plus white, plus a little bit of more warm tones over just this top part of the house. And okay, so I'm just gonna take a look again at from before and after any of the editing, and this is slowly starting to get, or it is almost where I want it to be. So let's go back into the color temperature, maybe make it a tiny bit more cool, and that's pretty much where I'm gonna end it, I think. Perhaps just make the very top right of the sky a little bit darker, while then also adding a filter for the bottom right here, and kind of angling it a little bit to make it darker like this. So this is kind of an additional vignetting factor and can be really nice to close out your picture. But with that being said, and with just one very last radial filter being made with a ton of warm tones over this tree specifically, I'm gonna say I'm done. And as I promised, I'm gonna show you before any of these radial filters to after, and especially pay attention to the contrast. So before, it is a huge difference. Afterwards, of course, much brighter. You have all of these background, is a lot brighter, more interesting, a little bit more hazy. But also, we still have that contrast, the differentiation, and it just looks so good. If I would just remove that one filter here, you can see it blends in the rest with the bridge and the stuff in the background. It just is so even. But with this one filter, it does add a lot. And, this has been a very long video, so I'm just gonna call it quits here. Now, please let me know whether you would like to see more of these kind of 20, 30, 40-minute videos. Because, I don't know, I really enjoy making them, but at the same time, I'm not sure if they're interesting. I think they might be interesting to people who already know Lightroom, but just wanna, really figure out the details. But, just leave a comment and let me know. I'm always really happy to hear your feedback, whether positive or negative. I'll see you in the next video. Take care, guys.